Welcome to ZKast, everybody. I'm ZS Caravallo from ZK Research, and welcome to the special two-part episode, or two-part version of ZKast. This is actually the first one I'm going to be doing. I'll be doing it with VMware, and we've got a very special guest today. We've got Sanjay Uppal, who's the SVP and GM of the SP and Edge business unit at VMware. Sanjay, that's a really long title. But welcome to ZKast, and just give me a brief intro of what that title means and what you do at VMware.
Yeah, hey ZS, nice to see you as always. And yeah, I think that title is a mouthful, but very simply said, I'm the edge guy. So when it comes to the things that are happening at the edge, where the edge could be, where 5G is running, where the edge could be something that's in a branch office or in an oil rig or department store, or even at the back of a police car, all of these are edge locations. And infrastructure that goes into them, whether to improve network resiliency or to have security, to make the 5G network run better, or to run compute, all of that is edge for us. And it's closely related to what VMware does, which I'd be delighted to discuss with you and, of course, the audience today.
Yeah, in some ways, all the way back to its roots, VMware has always been an edge company anyways, right? Like when you think of how compute works, right? In a way, you've always kind of pushed the limits of where compute's been going to. Now, I do want to start off asking you, VMware, a few months removed from the VMware Explore conference. And I attended your keynote at that one. And you actually, I thought, did a very nice job of setting the stage for what a multi-cloud world looks like and, what edge looks like. Now, both those terms, I find, tend to get thrown around a lot, right? Both edge and multi-cloud. And they tend to have different definitions based on the vendor you're talking to. From your perspective, let's start with multi-cloud. How do you define what multi-cloud is?
Yeah, I think it is a term that's been thrown around a lot in the last, I'd say, 18 to 24 months. And for us, it's kind of an outside-in approach. So what we do first thing is, talk to our customers, both telecom operators, large businesses, enterprises. And over the course of that time period, what they're telling us is that, if you look at the context of an individual application, you have to look at the needs of the application. And then when you drill down, you find that maybe components of that application should run in different locations. And so different data centers, depending on what the needs are. So meaning that the visualization may run at one place in the back end, the number crunching may run at a different place, your AI ML models may run at a third place. So this is one aspect which will lead you into an architecture that has different clouds, both public as well as private, that you might want to connect together. Then there's another aspect to it. It's not just one application that enterprises or telcos run, there's many of them. So when you look at many of them and you want to look at resiliency and disaster recovery and how do you make sure that you ensure that all your SLAs are met, again, it's going to lead you to a very similar conclusion that if you have the choice of many backends and clouds, but as long as you can put them together in an automated way, and you can get assurance across them, then of course you would much rather have the diversity. It's very similar to what happened in the software-defined data center when prior to virtualization, the hardware software used to be plugged together. When once virtualization come in, you dissociated it, you got a layer of abstraction. So the same thing here, we're trying to build this layer of abstraction that sits in front of all different cloud destinations so that you're not choosing a hyperscaler or a cloud destination first and then working backwards. You're actually choosing the needs of the application first and then working to where it wants to be. And the edge is just an extension of that, meaning that when you look at the other end of it, where does the application need to get accessed from? So it's either a human being or a laptop or an endpoint, or could be a sensor or one of these IoT gateways. Yeah. When you look at it from that perspective, that's the edge accessing the multi-cloud. So that's how this whole thing fits together for us.
Yeah, well, let's hold on the edge talk. And so when I think about multi-cloud, it is different than multiple clouds, right? Because lots of companies use multiple clouds, but if they're not tied together, it's just multiple clouds and not true multi-cloud. And in fact, if you look in the consumer world today, it's actually very common for, you look at an app like Waze or something like that, they're not pulling all that information from one source, they're pulling location from multiple places, they're pulling AI from multiple places, right? And so it's been interesting that enterprises, I think, have been very slow to embrace this. Now understand that the risk of failure is a lot higher than maybe for a consumer app. But I think what you described there too, I think the thing that VMware did early on was the abstraction and software it created allowed us to disaggregate the components of hardware. And now when we talk about multi-cloud, it actually allows us to disaggregate software in a way. So instead of having to live with monolithic software that lives in centralized locations, we can live with disaggregated software that interacts with multiple locations. Now, you did toss in that term edge, right? And it's another term that I hear used a lot in many different ways. And the telcos have their own telco edge. I've heard 5G edge, industrial edge, enterprise edge, campus edge, Wi-Fi edge, right? So is the definition of edge all those things, or how should companies think about what edge means to them? Because with cloud, it's pretty simple. You've got a centralized, hyperscaler or your own private data center, but with edge, it seems like it's a lot more nebulous, I suppose, when you think about it. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. One last point I wanted to make, which is precisely you nailed it by saying multiple clouds is different from multi-cloud. So one of the things that we have been trying to say at VMware is we extend the digital infrastructure across even to the public clouds. So we have our stack running on the public cloud, like VMC that runs with AWS, AVS that runs with Microsoft Azure. So if you have applications that are composite, but run on these different clouds, you have the underlying digital infrastructure that ties them together. So which is different from on a client side going and accessing multiple clouds. So that's precisely, you hit the nail on the head. Yeah. So looking at it from the edge side, there were so many different definitions of the edge that I thought, maybe there's something, which is at VMware Explore, wanted to make something that was not just simple, but it actually encompassed what we're trying to get done at the edge. So what we say is that the edge is digital infrastructure that you put across a number of locations close to where the endpoints are producing or consuming data. So it's very simple. It's digital infrastructure, so it's software-based. It's across a number of locations. So the physical distribution of this digital infrastructure is critical because it brings with it a lot of challenges. If you are distributing to 50,000 cell sites or 20,000 retail stores or hundreds of thousands of locations, it's very different than giving it to 6 data centers. So this location thing,
yes.
And then close to where the endpoints are producing or consuming data, because then you come up with where does this have to run? You don't have a lot of infrastructure to run it at in many places. And so the shrinking of the infrastructure is really critically important. So that's a simple definition. Then we get into, well, where are these locations? Are they on the enterprise's premise, in which case we say it's the far edge? Are they in between the enterprise's premise and let's say a telco point of presence, in which case we say it's the near edge? And then we get into, well, if it's a telco, then what's the provider edge versus the RAN edge? And the edge, how thick is it, how thin is it? But it all comes from this underlying, we think a definition that works for everyone.
Yeah, and so when I think about edge, though, a lot of the workloads tend to be fairly ephemeral. It almost mandates we move to multi-vendor, right? Because I think when you can go all in on one of the hyperscalers. And so when you think about the role that VMware plays in this, what are some of the big challenges that abstraction layer that you create can be solved that the customers might look at as they go to this kind of multi-cloud edge-driven world?
Yeah. So I think one of the first challenges is one of what I say is shrinking the stack. So I should be able to stand up and say, honey, I shrunk the stack, right? Because what we need to run it at, sometimes you get like, I'm actually in New York City right now. I'm going to head off to the UK, and we have a customer over there that has put our edge compute stack in the back of police cars. So, don't have a whole lot of infrastructure because you got to worry about the battery consumption, you got to worry about the heating and everything. You don't have a lot of infra there. So number one challenge is, have you been able to shrink the stack? So what runs well in the data center when you have a lot of cores, they're powerful, you have memory, you have power, all of that goes away when you're talking about these edge kind of locations. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is one horizontal scale. If you have the same infrastructure that needs to run in 50,000 locations, that's a lot different than running in 6. And then the third challenge is one of automation. Again, if you have this level of horizontal scale, how do you make sure just in the first place that you get all this infrastructure installed and configured? And then the next one is about assurance, which is how do you keep it upgraded? How do you keep it operated? How do you keep it maintained without having an army of people to take care of it? So this commonality in terms of shrinking of the stack, making sure that the automation works for horizontal scale, the assurance works for the scale. These are kind of the main challenges that you get with an abstraction layer. Of course, you could say that, we'll try and do all of this at the software layer, but then every application has to repeat, overcoming these challenges. And that's pretty hard to do. So if you put it in the digital infrastructure layer, which is the software layer, and you get enough support from the hardware, then, this whole thing with this kind of edge model, and then you get access to the multi-cloud, then that seems to work pretty well.
Yeah, I think the other benefit that I, from my perspective, that you bring too is a bit of a normalizing function in the areas of policy and security and management and stuff, because the AWS tools are great for, AWS and Snow, right? Azure tools were great with Azure Stack and Azure, but it's not like those are going to work cross-cloud, right? And I've actually asked all the hyperscalers about it, and they don't really seem to have a lot of interest in facilitating cross-cloud functionality. But it seems like, given you're the abstraction company, that's an ideal role for you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we think of ourselves as the Switzerland of the digital infrastructure. And so, when companies know that they don't either, for a variety of reasons, don't want to go with just one approach in the cloud world, and they don't want to extend that one approach all the way to the edge, then we're a very good option because we provide that layer of abstraction. And then you get choice with it, you get flexibility, and you get these additional benefits of automation, assurance. You can sign up with SLAs, and we can do this, everything from cell sites that a telco is deploying to, retail stores to manufacturing floors and the like. And your policy point is quite important. As we know, in the SD-WAN space, we came up with a mechanism that scaled very well. You're able to, from an edge location, have a pull-based mechanism to tell you what your personality is. You can actually ship a hardware device anonymized anywhere. You don't have to sticker it with the right serial number or anything. It gets its personality, and then you get its profile. And all of this scales because it's a pull mechanism based on policy. And that can be extended into the RAN. It can be extended for compute. It can be extended in a variety of ways. So we think these horizontal mechanisms, we think, are very powerful at the edge, and then will give you access to that multi-cloud world.
And I find it interesting that your title is, SVP and GM of Service Provider and Edge, because historically, when you think cloud, that's been owned by three companies, right? Mm-hmm. But when you think edge, that does open the door. In fact, you could argue that the 5G operators, the mobile operators, the telcos, are actually in a better position to offer edge services. Now, of course, they're regional. So again, this kind of complicated world of multi-vendor actually does come to fruition. And is that how you look at it? Yes.
I struggled with whether we should just say edge business unit. But then, whenever we talk about edge, when you think of the numbers of locations, a wide area network always has a role to play. And whether that wide area network is a wired network or increasingly so a wireless one, because now we're seeing, I would not have predicted that in 2022, we'd be seeing such a flurry of new wireless options, right? You got Starlink, you got all the LEOs options, you get everything from, the NB-IoTs for the low bandwidth stuff. You get all this, but it really drives the need for an intelligence layer that runs on top, which is really what, we are providing. And that's why when you say edge, you almost always have to talk about what's the network underneath, and who provides the network. It's the service provider. So from an architectural standpoint, these go hand in hand. But then also from a business standpoint, what we found through the SD-WAN example is that, almost 2/3, sometimes it's even on a quarterly basis, 70% of the business that comes from an edge perspective actually comes through the telecom operator. So we've been very close to the telecom operators to say that, okay, that's our primary route to market. Of course, we'll go route to market with system integrators, with resellers, but really because of the network, the importance of the network in there, we think, that's why I thought it might be a little kludgy to say service provider and edge, but it's actually somewhat descriptive.
Yeah, and it's accurate that way. And so last question for you, when I think of edge, historically, the historical use, it's not like edge is new, right? But the historical use cases have been things like oil and gas and mining and, places where you really had a hard time getting good connectivity to. I think the rise of all these different wireless options allows us to deploy more edges in more places. And so for people watching this, what are some of the emerging use cases of edge that you see more and more companies should be thinking about?
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple. There's two verticals where this is really taking off. The first is in retail. So both for loyalty, for things like loss prevention, just to understand the customer access better, there is two types of edges being deployed in retail stores. One is to aggregate large amounts of data to understand customer patterns, and the other is vision to understand how things should be placed in the stores. Including, when you have these automated scanner things, sometimes the battery runs out of the scanner. What do you do? So there's prosaic examples, but there's also examples of what people can do to make the retail store be the center of the multi-channel experience as far as retail is concerned. So that's one area. And then you need the workloads to be pushed much closer because it's too long of a trip to go all the way to the public cloud. The other one is digitization of the factory floor. I've actually spent a significant amount of time on factory floors in the last 3 months or so. It's fascinating how, this physical machinery comes together, but none of it has been virtualized. It's all actually, a lot of it is sneaker netting around, even up to the application layer. So if you get it digitized and virtualized and then controlled with this digital infrastructure, that's the other place where there's a lot of change going on. In fact, at VMware Explore, I had this gentleman from JBS on stage with me from a food processing firm, and they were deploying computer vision to increase worker safety, to have better productivity, and they're seeing, 30% better productivity, which is actually very large when you consider the slim margins in some of these industries. So factory floors, retail stores are the first two that I'm seeing a fair amount of demand just in the last 18 months or so.
All right. Well, thanks. And I do have I guess maybe I lied when I said one more question, because I do have one more. If we do this ZKast again next year at the same time, will we look back and say 2023 was the year the edge became real?
Yeah, I think 2023 is definitely when you're going to see things move out of POC into deployment. And, I'll leave with one thing is really, it's the challenge is you got to get to a zero trust architecture. That's one Z. You got to get to a zero touch network. That's another Z. So you have two Zs out there and you're the third Z. So you put it all together and 2023 is going to be the year.
Okay, the year of the Z. I like that. So anyways, Sanjay, thanks for joining me. If you're watching this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and be on the look for part 2 of the special 2-part ZKast series. Anyways, thanks, Sanjay, and I'll see you next time.